Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians online webinar series, Foundations for Teaching and Learning about Native Americans. I'm Ed Schupman. I'm Manager of National Education here at NMAI, and I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma. Today I'll be joined by one of my colleagues, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hammer. I'm an education product developer at NMAI, and I'm a former middle school teacher.
We're really excited and honored today to have an opportunity to tell you about our education work here at the National Museum of the American Indian. We know that there are somewhere around 1,000 of you participating in this webinar today. We know that a lot of you are probably teachers, educators. Perhaps some of you are teachers who've participated in our previous workshops or institutes, and we welcome you back again. Some of you are probably new with us, and we welcome you as well. We also want you, all of you teachers, educators, to know that we recognize that you're going through a really difficult and challenging time right now. And we really respect the work that you're having to do. And we hope that this webinar today and the next two sessions will offer you some solutions, some tangible ideas and resources that'll help you do this work, not only now, but in the future. We also understand that there are probably some parents out there, parents of children who can't be in their schools right now. And perhaps you're here looking for resources and materials that'll help you with education work at the home. I'd like to say a special shout out to all of our friends. If any of our friends and partners are joining us today, those of you who might have worked on our projects with us or are supporting our work, hello and thanks for being with us. And I want to say a special thank you to any Native Indigenous people who are joining us today as well. We know that we have attendees in this webinar across all 50 states of the United States. Canada, Switzerland, Portugal, Sweden, Greece, Ghana, Australia, New Zealand, and around the world. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, we welcome you, and I'd like to say Mado. Thank you for being with us today. As we get started, the first thing we'd like to do is share our National Museum of the American Indian land acknowledgement with you. And I'll get us started by just reading it for you. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. You know, feeling a sense of belonging is important for everyone, for every human being. For Indigenous people, that sense of belonging is often tied very closely to ancestral homelands. And those connections to homelands have to do with relationships with the environment, relationships with the people, memories of the things that have happened over millennia since time immemorial, and languages, the names of places. And no matter, even if the Native people themselves no longer live on those lands, those memories are still associated with those lands. Those places still have those names. And sometimes those places still hold the remains of the ancestors. So this idea of land and acknowledging that can be kind of complex. A recent event occurred with my tribe that has to do with our ever-changing relationships with the land. The original Muskogee homelands were located in what's now Georgia and Alabama. In the 1830s, most of the Muskogee were removed to Indian Territory, or what's now Oklahoma, as part of the Indian Removal Act. These new lands were supposed to be ours forever, but that promise was not honored either. So without going into the rather long and complicated legal history, just 2 weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court ruled that our lands in Oklahoma were taken illegally from us. And as a result, our legal jurisdiction now extends once again over a wide area of eastern Oklahoma, and our tribal sovereignty has been reaffirmed. It was a proud and happy day for Muskogee people. This trend of using land acknowledgements is very positive. We see it happening um, to start meetings and gatherings, arts organizations, other organizations, conferences, and so forth. It's good to acknowledge the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of the lands in which we live and work. And although it's very positive, it's really only the first step in what we'd like to see happen, which is moving towards collaborative, accountable, and respectful relationships with Native communities. And we think it would be really great if all US history teachers would start off from the very first day of school with a land acknowledgement. Imagine what kind of tone that would set for the year with students, not just going to be a place where we have a single narrative, where we honor diverse perspectives and we include Native voice. So give that a thought, and hopefully we'll hear about some land acknowledgements happening in your schools. So to get us started thinking a little bit more about today's topic, we'd like you to help us create a word cloud. So to do that, what you need to do is go to menti.com, menti.com. You can use your cell phone, you can open up another tab in your browser. Once you get to menti.com, just write in the code 12820. That code is 12820. And give us an answer to the question that you see here on your screen. When you think of Native Americans, what are some of the things, the images or terms that come to mind? When you think of Native Americans, what are some of the things, the images, the terms, phrases that come to mind? We'll build a word cloud together. While you're doing that, we'll give you a minute to work on the word cloud. I'd like to tell you a little bit about where Catherine and I work. The National Museum of the American Indian is part of the Smithsonian Institution. It's a complex of museums, libraries, research centers, and even a zoo. We have 2 exhibition locations for the National Museum of the American Indian. One is located in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. It's pictured here on the left side of your screen. We have another that is located in New York City in Lower Manhattan. It's pictured in the middle of the screen. And the museum's collection of over 800,000 objects is cared for at the Cultural Resources Center in Suitland, Maryland, pictured here on the right. One of the most common questions that we get at the National Museum of the American Indian is why that's the name of our museum. American Indian, of course, is a general way to describe indigenous cultures and communities of the Western Hemisphere. Native Americans is also often used. First Nations is used in Canada, Alaska Natives in Alaska, and Indigenous is often used in Central and South America. Really, the most correct term to use is the name that the tribes themselves use. But when you're trying to refer to people collectively, we need some kind of general term. And it's complex. I mean, currently there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States alone. Each of them has its own history, culture, and language. And if you consider the entire hemisphere, you can understand why a term like American Indian or Native American is inadequate to describe the vast diversity that exists among and between indigenous communities. But for the purposes of my talk today, I'll be using Native American, American Indian, and Indigenous. So Kimberly, can we go back to our word cloud and let's see what, oh my goodness. It's changing so quickly. I'm gonna have to lean in here so I can see. I see nature, thank you, land, proud, culture, community, family, trail of tears. I love these terms, and many of them are very positive, and some of them kind of reflect some of the things maybe that you've learned about Native Americans, maybe all your lives or as students. Seeing history, feathers, things that are associated with culture. So, oh gosh, I hope there's a way we can capture this and really take a close look at it later. I'm going to be I use this word cloud activity to get us started thinking about our topic today. I'm going to be talking about narratives about Native Americans, the language, the terms that have been used to refer to Native peoples. These are extraordinary times for us to meet in. There are momentous things happening around the world today. Beyond the devastating effects of the COVID-19 global pandemic, in the United States, a brutal and deadly act of violence caught on camera and then witnessed by millions has awakened a massive new consciousness about the ongoing presence and effects of systemic racism, and has begun a movement that not only recognizes racism, but encourages those who believe in social justice to act, to become anti-racist, to engage in the long overdue and necessary work to end racism and to bring equity and justice for those who suffer its effects. In the earliest days of the movement, the Native American experience was largely missing from the conversation. But with time, we began to see that change, and now there are some remarkable things happening there as well. Monuments that embody racist memories and principles are coming down. In California, for example, statues of Junipero Serra, the canonized Franciscan priest who oversaw the enslavement and brutalization of Native Californians. The statues are coming down. Across the country, statues and memorials to Christopher Columbus, the lost voyager who enslaved and brutalized Native peoples of the Caribbean, are coming down. And there's growing social and economic pressure on American sports teams to rid themselves of their racist mascots. The Washington, D.C. professional football team is a good example of that. These are all signs of great hope, but in some ways, they're also symbolic acts. The much harder work that remains to be done is to destroy the deep roots of racism. And it's the roots of racist views towards Native Americans that I want to examine with you today. We're going to explore that topic from an education viewpoint. We're going to try to deconstruct that educational history, its origins, its effects, and how we're working to address the issue here at NMAI. We're going to start by looking at some historical documents. There are hundreds we could have chosen, but we've selected a few to serve as examples. So, disparaging terminology started very early on. Here we have an example of a what we call a papal bull. The powerful Catholic Church of the 15th and 16th centuries was issuing edicts to leaders of Catholic European countries who were sponsoring expeditions, explorations of Africa, Asia, and of course the Americas. Here, Pope Nicholas V is authorizing King Alfonso V of Portugal to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever and other enemies of Christ wheresoever, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. And while you're at it, go ahead and apply and appropriate to yourself and your successors the kingdoms, the dukedoms, principalities, in other words, the property and goods, and convert them to your use. So here the Saracens refers to, I think, Muslim peoples, And pagans would be everyone in the world then who is not Christian, certainly the indigenous peoples. And one of the deepest roots of racism lies in the desire for economic gain, for nation and empire building. Many of you probably recognize this statement. Derogatory and racist language continued among European colonials and into the earliest formal documents of the United States. Here in 1776, the beloved Declaration of Independence begins with one of the most aspirational democratic statements ever made. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what were the views toward Native Americans at the time? Next slide, please. We don't have to go very far to find out. Just further down the page in that same Declaration of Independence, the writers complain that King George III is exciting domestic insurrections and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Here we have a letter from George Washington to James Duane in September of 1783. They're talking about the advisability of purchasing Indian lands rather than taking them by force in the early days of the American nation. So George Washington is referring to the native peoples as like trying to drive them out of their lands is like trying to drive the wild beasts of the forests, which will return as soon as the pursuit is at end. And the extension of our settlements will certainly cause the savage as the wolf to retire, both being beasts of prey, though they differ in shape. So even in a personal communication such as this is not necessarily public, a speech or something that would be offered to the public. We see prevalent social attitudes among the highest levels of government at the time. Here's another famous American president, especially known for his interactions with Native Americans, and President Andrew Jackson. Here he is, this is a transcript of a speech to Congress on the Indian Removal Act. He's arguing in favor of the act and using all of his powers of rhetoric. And I think it's interesting to hear this language. It will place a dense and civilized population in large tracts of country now occupied by a few savage hunters. It will enable them to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community. What good man would prefer a country covered with forests and ranged by a few thousand savages to our extensive republic, studded with cities, towns, and prosperous farms? I think one of the interesting things about this speech is that Jackson actually knew better. He had traveled extensively among the southeastern tribes, made war against the southeastern tribes. He knew their leaders. He knew their systems of government. He knew that southeastern tribes had businesses, that they were operating agricultural businesses and commercial businesses, that the Cherokee Nation had a syllabary with its own printing press and a 90% literacy among its citizens. But what is the purpose that he's serving here? And we can understand that he's trying to position native people as inferior, and therefore being able to justify and the taking of their lands and also bringing in kind of a pseudo-benevolent attitude, like it's really for their own good. Like it'll be better for them to be out there. So we're going to ask a question of you now. We'd like you to hop on your chat and answer this question for us. Why do you think this type of language about Native Americans persisted for so long? And use your chat and give us your thoughts on why does this language persist? We've just heard examples that cover a 300-year period. The chat is going by so quickly, it's hard for me to read, but I'm going to see if I can pick up a few of these comments. Racism, economic growth, dehumanizing, greed, willful ignorance. I love it. Misunderstanding, justifying treatment of Native Americans, the impact of Christianity. Yes. You know, these are the kinds of answers that we often hear from educators and people that we work with. Such language ultimately served the true purposes of the United States government. It became easier to justify the displacement and decimation of people who are feared by the masses. So thank you for those answers. We're going to be capturing the chat too, I believe, so that'll be nice to have those. So the kinds of hateful, racist, romanticized depictions of Native Americans that we've been listening to, by the early 19th and 20th centuries, had become institutionalized beliefs, common understandings among people, and what people thought and believed about Native Americans. So the question that we want to explore next is, how did these historical views begin to reflect in education? So to look at this, we're going to start with a series of examples from textbooks. And we're going to start with an example from 1904. It's called The Principles of Geography by Richard Elwood Dodge. He was a professor from Columbia University. Describes the 4 great races of the world. And I'm going to ask Catherine to read this text as you view its summary here on the screen. I think it's sometimes helpful to hear a voice read the language that we see on screen. And I'd like to encourage you to think about the words you're hearing. Imagine that Catherine is your teacher. Imagine that you're one of those students sitting in the classroom, listening to this text. And then we'll think about what the educational implications are. So Catherine, please.
The white race. The largest number of people belong to the Caucasian or white race. The members of this race have oval faces, small mouths and lips, large narrow noses, and straight eyes. They are the most active and enterprising and imaginative race of the world. The yellow race. The next largest number of people is found in the yellow race. The people of the yellow race are shorter than those of the white race and have coarse black hair, small noses, and small black eyes, with the outer corners a little elevated. As a rule, they are not progressive and include some of the most backward tribes of the world. The red race. The third great race is the American or red race. The people of the red race have a yellowish copper-colored skin, long coarse black hair, small round eyes, and are about the height of the white race. Most of the red race are but little civilized, although a few are just beginning to develop industries which will furnish products of value to the rest of the world. The black race. The fourth and last group of people is the black or Negro race. The Negroes that we know in this country have a dark brown or black skin, short black kinky hair, very broad flat noses, large round eyes, large teeth and thick lips, and are about the same height as white people. As a race, they are somewhat indolent, like other peoples whose homes are in tropical countries. They are often impulsive in their actions, but are faithful and affectionate to anyone for whom they care.
Thank you, Catherine. So, 1904. That's a little difficult to listen to, isn't it? There's nothing subtle about this text. The message that students take away from this is that white people are superior to all other races. Beliefs such as these were a result of the attitudes that had been inherited from previous generations. You hear the descriptions of the physical features, stereotypical, and the pseudoscience of eugenics was working at this time to try to justify these views. It's exemplary of the white supremacist values of the time. Native Americans are referred to as primitive, unsophisticated, and lacking culture, but just starting to produce something of value. The statement is completely ignorant of the agricultural, engineering, environmental, governmental, and many other achievements and contributions that had served Native and other cultures for many, many centuries. All right, let's take another look. Let's take a look at another example from 1916. Again, these are two professors, one from Colgate, the other from Columbia, in the Essentials of Geography second book. Catherine?
Columbus, supposing that he had reached the Indies or southeastern Asia, called the savages who met him Indians. North America was almost an empty continent, waiting for the white man to come and fill it with people.
Okay, thank you. Again, nothing very subtle here. The message here is that North America was largely an empty wilderness before the arrival of Europeans, just waiting for white people to populate it. This is the American narrative, the concept of manifest destiny and the heroic building of a country. Still positions Native people as savage and seems ignorant in light of the fact that North America and indeed the entire Western Hemisphere was far from empty at the time of Columbus's arrival, and that it had been populated by many diverse and unique cultures since time immemorial. But we're only a few generations removed from these overt statements. Millions of young children heard, believed, and lived these lives, lived their lives and passed these messages on to their children and grandchildren as these things became instilled in their minds. Psychologists tell us that these types of messages, when they're learned, actually wire the structure of our brains to accept them as truth or normal and deeply held beliefs. And so when a message comes along to counter those things that are so deeply rooted in our subconscious, we're very resistant to those ideas, to any sort of change. So that means that institutionalized racist attitudes and beliefs are extremely difficult to counter and change. Now, just to add a bit more perspective to this look at historical events. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the United States government and other governments around the world were doing their best to eradicate indigenous cultures and languages. In the United States, it was through the so-called assimilationist policies and civilization acts that created boarding schools that Native American children were required to attend, where they were forced to cut their hair, wear Western-style clothing, and punished if they spoke their tribal languages, their native languages. So we can imagine these children in these photos. This is a before and after photo of a group of children who attended the Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Although these federal policies and practices ultimately failed, they had a disastrous and long-term consequences that still persist in Native American communities. We're going to jump ahead a few decades now with our textbook examples. Uh, Here are the authors of A History of the American People, Volume 2, Carmen and Surrett, are describing the results talking about Native American history in slightly different language than what we heard previously. But let's see what it sounds like to us, Catherine.
Some Americans looked on the final conquest of the Indians as the inevitable triumph of civilization over barbarism. Others thought that it demonstrated nothing more than the ability of a powerful majority to destroy a weak minority. But regardless of how contemporaries regarded the passing of the Indian, two facts remain. A culture that had existed for centuries had been wiped out in 3 decades, and the last frontier had been opened up to settlers.
Okay, thank you. So this is not quite as overtly racist, maybe, as the early 20th century examples we listened to, but it's got a lot of problems. Whose story is it telling? It's about the white American powerful majority and description of Native Americans as weak and inferior. It's ignorant of the fact that there never was a single Indian culture, and very inaccurate because neither Native peoples nor their cultures had been wiped out. So we have one more example to look at, and this one comes from more recent times. It's United States History, published by Pearson, Prentice and Hall, 2008. Catherine, would you mind?
In the context of the chapter on democracy in the age of Jackson, a critical thinking question regarding the Trail of Tears asks, why do you think Americans were willing to give up new lands to the Indians?
Okay, so at first sight, this example might not even seem problematic to you. After all, it's pretty common kind of language and teaching that we hear today about the so-called Trail of Tears or American Indian removal. But what are the messages that are coming out of this type of narrative? That Native American history can only be told as it overlaps with the narratives of American growth. That Native Americans were in the way of American progress. That the United States tried to make amends and gave lands somehow to Native Americans. What's missing is Native American agency, people who were always active players in the shaping of their own lives and histories. It's also a very incomplete narrative. It ignores the complex history of removal or treaty making or negotiations and the long history of Native American resistance to removal. Treaties were the results of negotiations. Some of you may not know. There were many kinds of exchanges that resulted from treaties. Certainly lands were one type of exchange. Trade alliances, money, educational and agricultural benefits. But the lands in Indian Territory were not a gift from the United States. All right, let's ask you to jump back onto your chat here. Tell us, what did you first learn about Native Americans and where did you learn it? Let's get back on chat and start telling us, what did you first learn about Native Americans and where did you learn it? I'm seeing lots of Thanksgiving and pilgrims. That's pretty common. Preschool, movies describing them as savages, Thanksgiving. Movies, Help the Pilgrims, From My Family. Some people had more in-depth kinds of experiences, even very derogatory, pejorative kinds of things that people might have learned, depending on where you grow up. These are things that we often hear. Cartoon characters on TV, Pocahontas, and learning about Native Americans in organizations such as the Boy Scouts and so forth. So we thank you for those comments in our chat. Trying to close this out here. There we go. So what we'd like to do now is talk a little bit more about what we have found doing some educational research around the education of Native Americans. To look at these issues more thoroughly, we conducted a careful analysis of 28 of the most commonly used textbooks in 2012 and again in 2015. We took an exhaustive look at every page, all grade levels. We counted the number of sentences, we looked at the illustrations, we analyzed the voice. And one of the most interesting findings was that the list that you see here on your screen was the list that represents across publishers the most common narratives by far about Native Americans found in textbooks today. Now, to be fair, there are some exceptions. There are some readers and some other stories that some of the textbooks include. But these are the big ones, and you see them in almost every textbook series. So what do you notice about this list? Well, everything up here, except for the last item, goes back 150 to thousands of years ago. So it's about Indians in the past. A good number of these stories are actually about the building of America. A couple are about the Indians that the Indians that Americans love to love. Pocahontas, because she supposedly saved Jamestown, and Sacagawea, because she helped out the Lewis and Clark expedition. Some of these are maybe the same stories you learned. But where are the Native stories today? The arts, the communities, the complex sovereign status of Native nations. And why do these stories persist across all publishers? State learning standards are equally problematic. This study was conducted by Dr. Sarah Shearer and some of her colleagues. They found out that basically the same kind of results that we found in textbooks, that Indigenous people are portrayed in a pre-1900 context, almost 87% of the time. A long since forgotten episode of the country's development, spoken about in broad terms, and blended with discussions of Euro-American destiny. So, what kind of results happen from all of this? How do these narratives, these historical narratives, the way that these have fed into the education system and the types of stories and things that children learn about Native Americans, what kind of effects does that have? So we're going to take a look at some of those, kind of deconstruct that a little bit. Racist stereotypes and mascots. This is one that's been in the news a lot lately. Here we have a couple of people dressed up in imitation plains headdresses at an NFL football game. Faces painted. And if you believe the justifications that we hear for these mascots, this is in some way honoring Native people. If you look at the political cartoon on the right, it's in reference to the Cleveland Indians baseball team. We would never say the Cleveland Asians. We would never say the Cleveland Hispanics, the Cleveland Africans. So how is it that it's still somehow justifiable to say Cleveland Indians? I'd like to share a few findings from the American Psychological Association with you on the effects of these kinds of mascots. That they undermine the educational experiences of members of all communities, especially those who've had little or no contact with Indigenous peoples. that it establishes an unwelcome and oftentimes hostile learning environment for American Indian students that affirms negative images and stereotypes that are promoted in mainstream society, undermines the ability of American Indian nations to portray accurate and respectful images of their own cultures, his spirituality, and traditions, and that it's a form of discrimination against American Indian nations that can lead to negative relations between groups. Overt racism is still with us. Halloween is still a favorite time to be pretend Indians. In this slide, Halloween revelers dress up as Dakota Access Pipeline protesters. Their signs and their costumes are clearly meant to demean what was recently a serious and meaningful issue, and still is, among Native Americans, including many Native youth. How about not so overt racism? These are the kinds of things, biased and racist views that people may not even be aware that they have, but they distort reality. High cheekbones and black hair maybe never was universally true for Native Americans, but it's certainly not true today. Some people like to attribute magical, mystical qualities to Native Americans, such as we're all medicine men, or highly spiritual, or wise. Native Americans are sometimes thought of as the world's first environmentalists, but that's a modern term that doesn't really apply and an oversimplification of complex, long-standing cultural relationships with place. Native Americans are still thought of as warriors and the best fighters. Again, that is a stereotype that oversimplifies certain kinds of traditional roles in Native American cultures. But American Indian kids are still subject to violence today because other kids think it's cool to fight an Indian. And then we have the idea of Pocahontas. Native American women, especially, are highly sexualized. Think of a cartoon Pocahontas running around the forest with her buckskin cocktail dress. What about leaders? Bad education about American Indians also has an impact on leaders at every level. People who make decisions, people who deal with the management of natural resources and legal issues of treaty rights, jurisdiction. Here, even a sitting president was unable to articulate what's meant by the sovereignty of Native nations. In this example, another national political figure, Rand Paul, says, if they were assimilated within a decade, they'd probably be doing as well as the rest of us. This statement shows a serious lack of historical and cultural awareness. It's reminiscent of those late 19th and early 20th century rhetoric that was used when the US government institutionalized destructive policies that were intended to erase Native cultures and to terminate tribal governments. Another study looked at the presence of Native Americans in media and found that little to no, in other words, 0.0% to 0.04% of media representations portray Native Americans as contemporary people. And the second part of this is one that you can test very easily yourself. You can just go to your search engine, you can type in American Indian or Native American. In this test, 95% of first 100 Google images and 99% on Bing for those terms, Native American and American Indian, brought up antiquated portraits. Invisibility is another form of bias. So let's ask you for another chat. Why are Native Americans so invisible? Tell us, why do you think Native Americans are so invisible? Systemic oppression, fear of getting it wrong, white privilege, kept apart from mainstream society, people thinking they're all gone, segregation. If we don't see them, we don't have to acknowledge them. Generations of textbook and power, really great answers. And, you know, we often hear answers like white Americans are still writing the history in the history textbooks. Teachers lack access to good information. White supremacist, Eurocentric attitudes still exist. So yes, thank you for those tremendous answers. What about at our museum? Every year we get 1 million or so visitors to our museum. They come from all over the world, and they bring varying levels of knowledge and awareness. We welcome them, no matter what their level of awareness is. But there's often a surprising level of ignorance, and we see that in the types of questions that they might ask. Some of those are represented here on the screen. And these are the questions that our cultural interpreter staff, many of whom are native themselves, have to answer when someone asks a question like, aren't Indians gone? What about for Native American children? What sort of effects do these have? Well, the consequences are often severe. When they see their communities as stereotyped or locked in the past, or when they don't see themselves at all, it leads to confusion, alienation, and other kinds of social and psychological issues. And how about educators? Well, teachers receive the same education growing up as everyone else. And it's likely that in the pursuit of their degrees to become teachers, they've not had an opportunity to be exposed to Native American history or culture or good resources and materials to help them with that work. So they lack the personal knowledge and awareness of Native history and cultures. We know that teachers hear, maybe there's something wrong with these resources out there. We're not sure what, you know, but we don't want to be offensive. We don't want to be inaccurate. So as a result, a lot of teachers will just kind of skim it, maybe default to the textbook, or maybe just skip it altogether because of their confusion, their anxiety, and their fear. So now what? I just want to say that, you know, we don't do these kinds of analyses to make anyone feel personally guilty. Our purpose in understanding these historical and educational narratives is to move the conversation forward, to try to find solutions and to establish new ways of educating. In the remaining few minutes that I have, I'd like to tell you about Native Knowledge 360. This is our national education initiative at NMAI to transform teaching and learning about Native Americans. Our director, Kevin Gover, recently said, the existence of our museum is a blow to racism. And so this work is one of the highest priorities that our museum has. And it's viewed as extremely important. So we started Native Knowledge a couple of years ago, Native Knowledge 360. And I'd like to tell you about the 4 components of NK 360 by way of getting you thinking about this initiative. The first component is a set of what we call essential understandings. The first bit of our work is to replace some of these inaccurate, incomplete, and stereotypic stories. So we developed a framework of essential understandings based on the 10 themes of the National Council for the Social Studies Standards. You see those themes listed here. And then we wrote sample key concepts under each of those themes. We borrowed this idea of essential understandings from our good friends in Montana, people who do the work at the Office of Indian Education there, where they had developed a set of essential understandings many years ago and made it specific to the Indian nations of Montana. But we looked at this from a national or even international perspective and said, what are the themes that we can put in place that will help educators begin to think about Native Americans in different ways? We want all Americans to understand Native Americans as diverse peoples and cultures across time and place, since time immemorial to the present day, as sovereign nations who have always had government systems, diplomacy with other nations, as peoples who've generated and participated in international trade and economics, engineers, scientists, people who built big cities, agronomists who developed crops that helped feed the world today, environmental managers who created sustainable landscapes before Europeans arrived here, artists whose across time whose works belong in the world's great institutions of art, and contemporary people who live in the modern world but deeply value and work to preserve their languages, their cultures, and their histories. We want to replace those common narratives that we find in textbooks with this, a set of essential understandings that provide for more expansive, more inclusive thinking and learning about Native Americans. In addition, we're collaborating with Native communities to create new online lessons that offer a richer and more inclusive discourse that include the voices of Native peoples themselves. These resources that you can find online are interactive. They employ the powerful pedagogy of inquiry and utilize questions and rich primary and secondary sources, and tasks for students to build skills, such as developing arguments based on evidence. We've spent a lot of time talking and conducting research with teachers over the years. We know the vast majority of teachers want to do the right thing, but we know that they haven't had the opportunities to build the skills and the confidence needed or the access to the resources. So we've developed a variety of professional development opportunities for teachers. We have an annual institute. This year we've taken it online. We have a variety of workshops that we do at both of our museum locations and at various regional locations. And a teacher in residence program. And we are also starting to do now more webinar and online kinds of learning opportunities for educators. And finally, we know that we're not the only ones who are doing this work of improving education about Native Americans. There's a lot of really effective and good work that is happening among Native communities themselves, in various state education agencies, higher education, and other organizations. So our partnerships with these like-minded organizations help us raise the level of awareness and increase our reach and effectiveness. Well, we see a lot of hope in the powerful and courageous acts against racism, xenophobia, and intolerance that are occurring today. These issues are only going to be permanently changed if we work at them over the long term. We have a long way to go to achieve social justice for Native Americans. In Native communities, there are still enormous disparities in health, economics, and other social issues. Some of these are real life or death challenges, such as the disappearance of an untold number of American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls under suspicious circumstances, the disproportionate number of Native Americans affected by the coronavirus, and the fact that, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Native Americans are killed in police encounters at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic group. But ultimately, this issue is not just about Native Americans. It involves all people who have in the past or who now make up this multicultural, diverse, ever-changing, multifaceted country that we call the United States. Ultimately, it's about how we understand and tell our country's story. Real, substantive, and lasting change will only happen when we prioritize and institutionalize truth instead of racist views. And when we not only tolerate, but we embrace who we truly have been and who we are, then our education systems will follow. I believe that education is where lasting hope lies for all of this. It's in the rooms where children are educated, whether classrooms or living rooms, that we can finally be relieved of the poison roots of racism and replace them with empathy, compassion, and equity. This remarkable object from the NMAI collection makes a powerful statement about the many different but connected parts of the United States. Nations, created in 2002 by Ute artist Jenny Ann Chapoose Taylor, is just 20 by 30 inches, but it includes 131,000 beads that weave together the stripes and initials of the 50 states. But in detail, you may not even be able to see it includes the names of 456 Native American nations, along with 4 statements that to the artist exemplify what it means to be American. One of those statements is, "Now join hand in hand, brave Americans all. By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall." And that's a quote from John Dickinson in 1768. We want to ask you to join us in this work. You can help us build a new, more complete and accurate American narrative and social justice for Native Americans. So it looks like we have a few minutes. I'd be happy to try and take a few questions. See if I can answer any questions you might have for just a few minutes. Someone's asking if these quotes can be passed along. You'll have access to a recorded version of this webinar, so you'll be able to see the PowerPoint again and all the materials that have been here. Someone is asking a question, how will be able to access the classroom materials for use? Thank you for that question. I hope that you will join us on the next 2 days to start that journey. My colleagues tomorrow, Johanna Gorelick and Renee Goki, and the day after that, Colleen Smith, have wonderful presentations prepared for you that will help provide you with some practical applications, some tips, some tools, and some resources that we've built to help you with the work of education. So please tune in, and then in a few minutes I'll also show you our website URL where you can access all of our materials and resources. So really great question from a teacher. If a person can only has time to do a little bit of education, what is a must? That's a really common question, because we know that teachers are often challenged by the depth of the scope that they have to address every year, the demands on the classroom time. So we offer resources that are targeted towards curriculum requirements that address national standards, a variety of national standards, and also tie to thematic areas in American history or world history that you might not have thought of making those associations. So we encourage teachers to think broadly about their curriculum and to try to apply concepts and tie-ins to Native Americans whenever possible. Someone is asking how many are in attendance today. We think there's around 1,000 of you, which is really encouraging, and we're so grateful for this amount of support and people who are interested in this work. We know that there's great work going on in a number of states where standards are being revised and more thought being given to how Native American concepts can be more inclusive across the curriculum. That's really encouraging work that we see happening in various states. Don't forget about the sciences. Don't forget about English language arts. I've been talking about history and social studies a great deal today. But a lot of our partners in Montana and Washington State, other states, Oregon, are working on or have highly developed curriculum materials that are available. We want to give a shout out to those and encourage you to look at those materials as well. But please do spend some time on our website and take a look at what we've got to offer, and get acquainted with our professional development opportunities so that you can expand your experiences and get additional training to help you. Alaska Native Knowledge Network, I believe, was something that somebody mentioned in one of their comments. So again, I really want to encourage you to join us for the next 2 webinars. I think that you will find them very practical and helpful. I've tried to set the stage today for why we need to do this work and kind of understanding a lot of the historical background to the need for this kind of work. And then I'd also like to encourage you to stay in touch with us. We can go to, thank you. Here's our website URL, americanindian.si.edu/NK360. From that, you can access all of the online lessons and resources that we have, and that's an ongoing process with us. We have a lot there, and we're adding more all the time. And we're building a lot of additional information for teachers and educators that you'll find on our website. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can reach us at the email address listed at the bottom of the screen. I'd like to thank my colleague, Catherine Hammer, for her help today. Thank you, Catherine, and to the many people who have been working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. I especially want to thank Vilma Ortiz-Sanchez, Pam Woodis, and Michael Hussey from NMAI, and Kimberly McFarland and Allison Leithner from Smithsonian Digital. Most importantly, I want to thank those Native people and communities who have entrusted us with your stories, with your rich histories and your cultures. It's an honor for us to serve you. And thank you to all of you again for your time and attention today. Have a safe and healthy day, and we hope to see you again back here tomorrow. Mado.